at a UN climate conference. The Faith Pavilion is a dedicated space for different religions, different perspectives, different traditions to come together at COP to save humanity and save our planet. It's hosted by the Muslim Council of Elders organization in collaboration with the COP28 presidency and the United Nations Environmental Program. I would like to now introduce our very first session of the day. And just a couple of house rules. If you need to take a call or need to have a side conversation, please exit the pavilion to do that. And also, if you can use your social networks to draw awareness to our pavilion and our work using the hashtags Faith at COP28 and hashtag Faith Climate Action. So now we will hear from I-DIEM. I hope I said that right. Okay, perfect. On the topic, living spirit or commodity, traditional and faith-informed perspectives about land use in disasters and climate events.
Thank you. Thank you. It's okay to clap for her. It's okay to clap. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Chauncia Willis. I'm the co-founder and CEO for the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management. And as mentioned, this is the first panel of the day, but more importantly, this is the first time the Faith Pavilion has been established at COP28. Excellent, excellent. Our goal is to make sure we do such a great job today that it comes back again and again, and that we're always hosting a Faith Pavilion. This is going to be a very engaging and consequential discussion. We know that disaster resilience and climate resilience specifically is not always spoken of first. I've heard a lot this week about carbon emissions, gas emissions, carbon footprints, and all these great things. I haven't heard a lot about climate change impacts on disasters. So we're going to delve into that, and it's going to be a great discussion. Are y'all ready? Here we go. Our key session themes. We're going to be speaking about cross-cultural disaster recovery, and we're going to also cover disaster resiliency and mitigation. And we want to really prioritize the perspective of faith and how resilience is achieved through faith. And our panelists are going to go over that, so thank you for that, panelist. And we're going to finally talk about measuring recovery without talking about and prioritizing the financial impacts on recovery. Whenever we, and as you kind of think about disaster recovery, we always talk about the cost. What if we were to separate that and talk about the people first? So with that, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about I-DIEM. We were created as an organization, we were established to prioritize equity and disaster recovery and climate resilience. I should also acknowledge that Victoria Salinas from FEMA is here, so thank you for being here, Victoria. She's a great supporter. When we think about the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management, our mere existence is an acknowledgement that disasters must be done differently. The way we've done disaster management for years and years is not working, and it certainly doesn't work for everyone. And so we'd like to talk about that openly today. We'd like to talk about the DNA of disaster trauma and how it links to faith and how faith is needed for resilience. One major announcement we want to make sure everyone is aware of, and that is that I-DIEM Africa has been established. That is a global outreach center focused on raising awareness of climate change impacts and also ensuring that under-resourced and underserved communities across Africa are receiving the collaboration and the what is necessary to have a seat at the table, to have the perspectives of the people acknowledged and prioritized, which hasn't happened in many ways due to stereotypes and bias. And we have to speak openly about that. And so we'll get into that today as well. But I-DIEM Africa has been established, and it's going to be working collaboratively with the governments of Cape Coast, Kumasi, and Accra, Ghana, West Africa. So we welcome additional discussion about that. So our presenters, I have the microphone, so I guess I'll start with myself. Is that okay? As stated before, Chauncia Willis Johnson. I just got married, so I always forget to add that Johnson, but Chauncia Willis Johnson. And I've been doing this work for about 24 years. And so we are excited to be here today and to really talk about the work of disaster equity, okay, in the field of emergency management. Next, we have Marcus Coleman, an old friend, and I'll let Marcus introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Marcus Coleman. Honored to serve as the director for the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the Department of Homeland Security, one of 12 centers of the White House Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. And on behalf of my boss at the White House, Melissa Rogers, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell, thank you for having us here and looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Marcus, for being here and for flying 27 hours to get here. We appreciate you. Next, we have Camila Tapias.
Thank you. Can you hear me? There you go. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. It's an honor to be here in the first ever Faith Pavilion and to talk about this important topic. Again, my name is Camila Tapias. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia, but I'm in the U.S. and I represent having different hats today, representing Spin Global. A little bit about Spin Global. We're a public benefit company based in Maryland in the U.S., and our mission is to disrupt disasters from neighborhoods to nations. And we do so in different ways through strategic planning. We do planning for FEMA, for at the local, state, federal level. The P stands for, this will describe our pillars for what the acronym of SPIN. Partnerships, everything that we do, and one of the reasons why we're here too, and the partnership that we have with I-DIEM and FEMA, none of our work would be possible with partnerships and the communities that we serve. And so we really have this private-public partnership lens and really trying to have more private sector-led initiatives. And the I stands for innovation for impact. So we actually try to create different innovative approaches to disaster preparedness, disaster management through technology and leverage technology for good. We actually have two platforms. One is called Planet Ready, and the other one is called Responder CQ. And the purpose of this platform is to change this culture of preparedness and try to change from a reactive to a more proactive approach and reach the 99%. So what's the 99%? We call it, people that are traditionally not included in exercises and training and different opportunities and community-based opportunities. So how can we make preparedness a little more fun? And we have this platform where you can take 15 to 20-minute exercises based on your hazard, based on your community, based on your risk score. And after you take an exercise, then would you make it more interactive? Then the goal is that your risk score decreases. So this is an example of some of these technologies that we try to engage with. And actually, we use it in houses of worship, different education, different schools, through businesses and different communities based on under need. And then Responder CQ is a little more on that. So, and I also represent I-RISE, the U.S. board and the global boards. For those of you really quickly that don't know about I-RISE, I-RISE is under the UN and is the private sector alliance for resilient society. So this is how can we include the private sector a little bit more. So definitely glad to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to focus our discussion, this first segment, on engagement and collaboration. And one of the programs that we have at I-DIEM is called Community Crafted Resilient Solutions. We call them CSRs. And this is where we look for opportunities to increase and build resilience by working directly with the communities to understand their perspective. And specifically indigenous communities. We're going to talk about our work with indigenous communities and the perspective that both of our panelists have from their work with those communities as well. So I'm going to ask Marcus a question now, and I really want to make sure that we are being as transparent as possible. It's interesting, both of us, all of us, are considered minorities or people of color. Our perspective and our ability to identify with communities, communities of color, communities that have been marginalized, is really, in my opinion, undervalued. And so it plays into disaster resilience in ways that are so nuanced and cannot be fully communicated sometimes. So with that, Marcus, how does your organization engage with historically marginalized and indigenous communities after a disaster occurs?
So the Federal Emergency Management Agency, our mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. And a lot of the foundation of what we continue to do as an agency has been completely transformed in recently with the most recent strategic plan. Our strategic plan has 3 pillars. 1, instill equity in emergency management. 2, leading whole community climate resilience. And then we're often thinking about some of the current and emerging threats that are impacting communities. What that means for FEMA, what that means for my office, is we're focused on 3 things: people, policies, and process. The investment of people is acknowledging that before disasters happen and after, it's not just going to be the expertise of the emergency manager or the government officials. It's that community and that community knowledge, that contextual knowledge from indigenous communities or faith communities that's critically important to help co-develop solutions when disasters occur. A recent example for us in the U.S. government context is the work that we continue to do alongside some of the Native Hawaiians and indigenous communities impacted by the recent wildfires. When we talk about policy, that's being mindful that structurally there have been some policies that have been inequitable. In the disaster recovery context, a policy that we talk about in the U.S. government is how we've expanded the options of our FEMA Individual Assistance Program to help provide additional sources of funding for those communities that have been historically left out of accessing those disaster recovery funds. On the process side, we're extremely excited through our strategic goal 2, leading whole community climate resilience, to really look at all of our processes for how we continue to engage and invest in hazard mitigation and disaster risk reduction. Under the leadership of Victoria Salinas, we've taken on several efforts, including establishing the community disaster resilience zones, having a strong emphasis on nature-based solutions, and more importantly, finding different ways to build an entire coalition of organizations that are focused on climate action for disasters happening today and in the future. But we know that that process requires, again, investment in people and tweaking policies. And so we're constantly looking to identify, partnering with groups like the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management, have our colleagues here from Interfaith Power and Light, the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, and several other organizations that are comprised of different national faith groups and some indigenous organizations that have really helped us make sure that everything that we're doing centers the lived experiences of those communities that we most seek to serve.
That is so powerful, the lived experience. That is the key. That is the key. It's important to foster a sense of shared responsibility in resilience. So Camila, how can indigenous communities and different faith communities collaborate on shared values related to land use and disaster preparedness?
Yeah, I truly believe that I think this was a great segue for the success and long-term, that sustainability of those community-based interventions. We need, among others, those traditional knowledge, the traditional knowledge from the communities, and how can we leverage the expertise and to combine it with more scientific methods and some more of the traditional ones that we've seen. And I would like to share a story that resonated with me, and I think it will resonate in particular with this subject. I think you've heard it, Chauncey, so recently as we heard the announcement of the Ghana, I-DIEM Ghana, the Community Outreach Center. So Joel Thomas, our CEO, he went with Chauncey on this trip, and he met with a lifelong friend in Ghana. He met 20 years ago. And they were catching up, and part of the discussion about community-led initiatives was this story about this guy born and raised in Ghana, wife, got all his education in Ghana, and trying to give back to the community and trying to find opportunities to do so and benefit. He started to build a water well, right? He built this well, and then he realized, and in the community after they built it, that nobody was using it. They're like, but why is nobody using this well? It's water, right? Who doesn't want water? And after they started to talk about different communities, they realized that this was sacred land where a lot of indigenous communities and ancestors, these were actually graveyards, right? And those were graveyard markers that were there they didn't know. Mm-hmm. And I share this not to blame this guy, but also because this story was an example of vulnerability, and share that sometimes we actually learn from our mistakes, and to get it right sometimes takes time, and how this opportunity made them and actually challenged them to completely change this approach and to engage the community and their indigenous communities differently. And after that, they changed, and then they were able to, and we're talking about this shared values and this ownership of these strategies. So an opportunity to engage with different faith communities, different groups, and really understand, what are your needs? How can I come and really understand what you need and come and meet them where they are? And after that, they've built over 90 different water wells that now those are functional, right? But that one, nobody's using it, which makes sense. But took that opportunity to actually reflect that we need to find those opportunities in different space and create the space to create this ownership in the land. So this story, of course, I'm not going to forget it, and I think it really encompasses what we're talking about in finding those opportunities through mistakes and opportunities to do better and truly engage and collaborate and found common ground.
Mm-hmm. And yes, I agree. I was actually there to hear this story, and it was so powerful. Mainly, one of the things that I think has been represented is the value of hearing the community's perspective. And one story to complement that one, we love storytelling in I-DIEM, as you know. One of the comments that came from a tribal leader was, Chauncey, they always tell us what they're going to do with us, what they're going to do to us, but they never ask how we would do it, how we would become more resilient. They never want our perspective. And that's so powerful, because if you had asked, we would have told you, please don't build a well right there. That is an ancestral burial ground. Simple as asking. Now we're going to see a short video, and this video is something that is powerful for me. I traveled to Ghana, as we've talked about, and I was able to hear a tremendous amount about faith and the trauma that exists. We know how we feel about the transatlantic slave trade in the U.S. as an African American. It's horrible, it's violent, it has a horrible history, and it brings up all kinds of terrible emotions. But we never acknowledge how our lineage, our ancestors, our family that was left in Africa, how they experienced it. And we also fail to acknowledge that religion existed before European Christianity. And Europeans did not bring Christianity. The oldest Bible is actually Ethiopian. So we're going to hear a little bit about the perspective of the Ghanaians in West Africa. So please play the video.
Mansa Musa was the emperor. Mansa Musa was the emperor of the Ghana Empire. So when I talk about the Ghana Empire, I'm talking about present-day Mali, Mauritania, Niger. His empire was really vast. He had Timbuktu as the capital, where he established one of the finest libraries and universities in the world. Mansa Musa was a Muslim. Every faithful Muslim would have to travel to Mecca once in your lifetime. It is recorded that when he traveled from West Africa, from Mali to Mecca, around the 14th century, wherever he passed, he devalued the price of gold. He devalued the price of gold in Egypt for about 12 years. So for example, let's say in Egypt then an ounce of gold was, let's say, $5,000. But when he went through, now an ounce of gold was like $10 or $20. So this is what this man did. He did same in the Middle East. So for one man to devalue the price of gold, then it means this man has a lot of it. And this news about Mansa Musa spreading gold all over spread around the world. And the Europeans got to know that, yes, there was so much gold in West Africa, south of the Sahara. So they came here around the 15th century looking for that gold. And they found that gold here in this country. And with time, the fort and castles they constructed for gold served another purpose. They served as slave castles and slave forts. So I mentioned earlier on, the Europeans came here with two motives. First, to look for gold, and secondly, to enslave. To enslave because the Catholic Church had decreed to Spain and Portugal that you guys can go around and exploit the world. And in the course of your exploitations, when you find new lands, you can do as you wish with those people. If they are not Christians, or if they are not baptized, and talk about West Africa. West Africa was not a Christian nation. So the motive was to enslave. So that was the reason behind the fort and castles. Let me draw your attention to this right here. So we have the male dungeons, my elders, and right above the male dungeons, we have the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. So it happened that Jesus was worshipped right there. Our ancestors also died and mourned right underneath the church. And it isn't a coincidence that a church was built on a dungeon. No, it was intentional. The same thing happened at Elmina Castle. The Dutch built their church. The Dutch Reformed Church was right above the female dungeon. So this is to say, the church played a vital role in the enslavement of our people. The whole thing about the transatlantic slave trade was orchestrated, or it was invented by the church. And when I say the church, I'm talking about the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Dutch Reformed Church, the Presbyterian Church, you name them. Because they came out with propaganda, malicious and fraudulent one, trying to justify that, Africans had no souls to be saved. And trying to justify maliciously or fraudulently that, there are some characters in the Bible that were cursed. That's Cain, Shem, and Ham. They're trying to say, okay, Africans are now the descendant of these characters. So, we are bound to be the white man's slave. But, this was greed from the church, greed and selfishness. So that made them to entice people to do evil. Because at the end of the day, the evil you did benefited the church immensely. So the church got rich from the enslavement, the toil, the struggle, and the death of our ancestors. So this is what I want to draw attention to. And also, let's go to southern part of Africa. We can talk about apartheid. You also know the apartheid thing was also orchestrated by the Dutch Reformed Church. So actually, the church has been a thorn in our flesh over the centuries. Yes. Any questions or comments, ladies and gentlemen?
Wow, isn't that powerful? Now we're going to talk about policy and justice. We just heard from one of and the photography, the videography on that was exceptional. Thank you. We just heard from the Cape Coast Castle, which is one of the oldest slave castles in West Africa. And there were many, about 60. And the DNA has the trauma in it. The indigenous people, not only those that were shuttled across to South America, Caribbean, North America, and other parts, but the people that stayed. So let's talk about land rights. how do land rights policies influence indigenous communities' ability to implement their own land use and disaster management practices? And what improvements are needed for their protection?
So from the federal perspective, something that's been recent from the disaster management space is we've actually updated our policies. When I'm talking about indigenous rights here, now I'm talking about some of the indigenous communities on the land that's now known as the United States. But one of the things that we've passed legislation for is to make sure that indigenous tribes or tribal nations can apply directly for FEMA assistance. So one of the big areas that we continue to focus on, and my colleague Kelby Kennedy, who serves as FEMA's first tribal advocate, has been looking closely at the policies that, again, in the case of the U.S. context with these nations, these are sovereign nations that we have formal treaties with. So how do we make sure that we honor some of those pre-existing treaties, recognizing that everything happens in the context, right? I think what's the reality of it is the climate crisis provides a context that exacerbates a lot of inequities. And one of the things that we're very mindful of as an agency with the moment that we have right now is that it's really important for us to do everything that we can to make sure that we are equipping and empowering those communities that have unfortunately been on the wrong end of that context, and then helping them position them and help them navigate what is a really complicated content subject matter expertise. For anybody that's done disaster management or emergency management or disaster programs, there are a lot of different type of federal government programs, state government programs, federal speak, and a big effort for us is to make sure, again, that we're bringing some of the people along and really listening to them and having them guide some of the ways that we think about recovery. Where that shows up for us when we talk about historically underserved populations, I know in that video it talked a lot about the role that some faith communities played from a place that has not been helpful, but it's been incredibly helpful for us to partner with organizations like the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Presbyterians, and others when disasters happen in places like Rolling Fork, Mississippi, or Selma, Alabama, because they also have historical context of what the different land has meant for those communities and what kind of investments are going to be needed long term to make sure that, yes, while the community is recovering, we're not just doing it from a place of what government thinks is right, but that we're doing it from a place that honors the context of those lived experiences of people that have been there hundreds, in some cases thousands of years beforehand across the country. So it's really important for us as an agency to do that. I know that's been a priority for the administrator, and it's something that we continue to be committed to as part of the Biden-Harris administration and our commitment to making sure that we make good on, again, instilling equity in all aspects of emergency management that we can, but we recognize, right, it is just one part of a much broader coalition that's needed domestically and across the globe.
Absolutely. I love that. Acknowledging what the land means and what it meant to the people. Acknowledging that. And I think that, you know, when you speak, you remind me of some of the things that we've also heard. Just wanting to have the cultural competency built in and not having it as an afterthought. If we're going to enact a program, whether it's FEMA or in some other parts of the world, a different form or a different representation for national emergency management, having the training and cultural competence built in so that we don't disrespect, we don't violate, and we don't ignore the perspective of the people that have the lived experience. That is so powerful. Camila, how can faith communities, marginalized communities, indigenous communities address issues of environmental justice in the context of land use?
Yeah, I truly believe that, you know, as we in our respective roles and in having this important conversation, it's important to understand that we need to create a space for traditional and scientific knowledge to coexist. oftentimes we see it as, and we worked in, different silos, and then we think, okay, and we've noticed now with a lot of the, public-private partnerships, and of course, FEMA has been doing a lot, and actually, we supported the development of the private-public partnerships guide. First ever guide is actually the one that has been more downloaded in the history of FEMA, and it really shows that the need, right, not only for private sector, but also we're going to add another P for the private-public partnerships. We need the people, right? Mm-hmm. It's always having that people-centric approach. And as part of this conversation, how can we, instead of using traditional knowledge and indigenous communities' knowledge, as seeing it as a one siloed approach, and then we have the scientific approach, how can we amplify it and leverage both? So, for example, I recently had a conversation with this leader from an indigenous community in Ecuador, and we're talking about early warning systems, right? We're talking about from disaster risk reduction, and how for so long, sometimes we overcomplicate a lot of stuff, and how they've been using a lot of different strategies in their communities through bonfires, through different instruments for them to alert their communities. We're talking about early warning systems. How can we don't necessarily have to shy away from that? We leverage other types of early warning systems that we're using, and how this will create another opportunity to continue to create innovative approaches to disaster management, early warning systems, et cetera. And then there's also online, and we're talking here in the context of the UN, for example, there's a new initiative now called the Early Warnings for All, and there's a call under the Sendai Framework for Action 2015-2030 to include indigenous knowledge and more intentionally in this whole process for climate justice, right, and environmental justice and disaster risk reduction. And something that I always use, and of course is core to my life, even before this disaster management and my role. I was an athlete my whole life, and sports, of course, has been core. I played basketball my whole life. I represented my country, and I played Division I basketball in the U.S. And I talk about this sports because I think you would agree with me that disaster management, environmental justice, disaster preparedness, is the ultimate team sport, right? When we talk about, we all have different roles, different responsibilities. You may be a better passer, a better shooter than me, right? We may have a lot of these indigenous communities that they have their expertise that we need to leverage, and then we need to lean into each other's strengths and combine and really understand that we need to work together, because if we are not winning, the people are losing, right? And if we're not working together, there's a lot of to unpack there from that role, but I definitely think, and just to wrap that thought, is that we continue to think about how can we plan with and not for the community, right? And always have that equity lens before, during, and after disasters, and understand the repercussions of not including them and not having them at the forefront, and not only having, and we just talked about this with Jessica before, it's not enough to just have a seat at the table, and it's not enough to just bring them, but what can we do about it, and actually listen to what they're trying to say and implement their ideas, right? So we're talking about this ownership. I think it's important from that piece, and really have this whole community, whole society approach in everything that we do, and I respect the roles.
Absolutely, respecting the roles, because everyone has a role. Know your role, right? One thing that brings to mind is the working with a group in Missouri. Was it Missouri, Minnesota? One of the two. And they said, Chancia, advocacy is a privilege. We've been mistreated for so long that we don't believe anyone actually wants to hear our voice. And so we've become accustomed to not saying anything and just experiencing the outcome. And that broke my heart, because it's true. Being able to speak up for yourself and to express agency is a privilege that everyone does not have. And so it's upon us, it's our job to ensure that equity is at the forefront of every aspect of strategic planning, of preparedness planning, of climate change as a topic and discussion. Equity first. To that end, our organization has a new documentary coming out called Muted: Climate Marginalization in America. Muted is a unique documentary, and I know most nonprofits may not focus on documentaries, but we focus on creating videos, small videos, to express the community's voice. So when we do community engagement, we like to actually record what their perspective is. And so we think that's important. So we're going to watch a snippet, a highlight of our video, our documentary called Muted, to be released December 22nd.
My name is Sherelle Parfait Dardar. I am chief of the Grand Cayuga Band of Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw, and I live in Chauvin within my tribal territory.
I can remember the day we went to deep down into the bayou. I mean, we were in a Ram truck. We were driving over power lines that were still down, driving through flooded water to get to see Chief Sherelle at her home. And the first thing I can remember when we drove up to her house was seeing her standing out in the hot sun, because it was so hot that day. And she was out there sweating with her cell phone, her hands on her hips. And, you know, I went up and I introduced myself. I said, hey, I'm Chauncia with I-DIEM.
Yes.
I'm Chauncia.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I apologize.
We just came to check things out, see how you were, and see if we could be of any service, any help at all. And she said, well, come on in. I want to show you what I'm dealing with.
As a leader and a resident, you know, my job is to, first of all, make sure that all my people in the tribal territory are aware of what's going on. Try to make sure that as many people evacuate as possible, you know, and get to a safe location.
Trying to survive a catastrophic hurricane like Ida, which was a Category 4, is going to be very difficult, even moving through in the future. Though, you know, people are still finding ways to build a little bit stronger, build a little bit better. Mother Nature is still pretty strong, and you can see even in areas where that had happened, where, you know, they had lifted homes, they tried to make the pilings a little stronger. There was still widespread devastation along the coast.
Certainly after Hurricane Katrina, the investment that's been made in the greater New Orleans area is something that has paid off. But once you leave that area and you get into Terrebonne, Lafourche, and our bayou parishes, they've made a lot of those investments themselves that have provided a level of protection. But as you go towards Southwest Louisiana, that level of protection doesn't exist.
My home, we built it ourselves. It was a mobile home at first, and when Gustav came through, it ripped all the roof off. We were almost finished. And so we lost that, and we had to strip the whole thing down, and then we started rebuilding. You know, and then I had more kids, so we built to suit the size of the family. Right. You know, so everything that was done by us. And yeah, it's not much. You know, we recycle things because that's good practice, you know, and if it's still good, you use it. And, you know, you put a little paint and a little love in there and it looks, hey, you got a home, you know? And a lot of our people have to work that way. We're not wealthy people. You know, we do the best we can with what we have, and we appreciate everything that we're blessed with.
We have to acknowledge that the disproportionate death, the generational negative impacts, and the very slow recovery timeframes in disaster, much of that is coming from biased policy and discriminatory practice.
I think the full recovery will be at least 10 to 12 more years.
we walked into our house, and the first thing that struck me as I walked through what used to be a hallway, because there was no roof, I saw 2 kids sitting on a crate. And I said, "These your children?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "They've been staying here in a house with no roof?" And she said, "Yeah. Where else we supposed to go?" And I could remember just, I couldn't breathe. I was like, oh, because I have a son. So anyway.
That is my embroidery machine. I brought it into the big house to save it. And it's digital, so there was a lot of rain. And I hadn't had the chance to fully learn it yet because of all the tribal work, so I had to take time in between my sewing work and, she's digital, so once they get wet.
I went into her
They don't work
house and
anymore.
I smelled the rotting food. And I saw everything gone, and she looked embarrassed. She looked embarrassed. And I saw where she had a dream catcher on the wall. And she said, "I sew for a living. And this is the 3rd time I've had to rebuild." There's a common trend, and I'm sure we've all seen it, where the most vulnerable people, those that are historically marginalized, those groups, are consistently most disproportionately impacted in times of disaster. When we don't prioritize people, when we don't put a priority on humanity, certain people and certain groups become expendable. They are acceptable losses. It's heartbreaking, but it's a fact. Okay. Gets me every time. Thank you. That was our documentary, and I find myself tearing up even now, just thinking about everything that we see out there, and that some of these people that we love, that we work with all over the country and now all over the world, some of the things they're dealing with, and to not have a voice, and to be the voice, and wanting to get it right every time. It's powerful. And we are the voice. So with that, I'd like to hear any final thoughts.
So, one, incredibly grateful for the Muslim Council of Elders and all the folks that brought together the Faith Pavilion. A reality for us as we go, not just from this COP, but moving forward, is we're going to continue to live in this space where we have to make investments in the future, but we're going to have to adapt to the disasters that are happening today. Was able to have a conversation before this panel where we were talking about some of the disaster survivors in places that we know very well are impacted disproportionately by disasters in Bangladesh and others. But as we live in a world now where the disaster landscape and the context continues to evolve, it is really going to be important that we are working alongside people of faith, working alongside indigenous communities to take every step possible to be thoughtful about how we bring in the right kind of investment to climate adaptation for the disasters today, while we continue to do what we need to do just necessary to mitigate against the impact for disasters tomorrow. So incredibly privileged to be on this panel here with I-DIEM and others, but I think that testament is a story that unfortunately is felt by billions of people all over the world, that while we are thinking about the future, we must also be focused on the present.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Final thoughts, Camille.
Yeah, I would say that I agree, and thank you so much for the opportunity to engage in this very, very important dialogue. And I would say that we can disagree on a lot of things, right? And we've talked about this even from faith. We talk about religion, political views, everything that. But biologically, I believe that we were designed to have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. So oftentimes, I think as humans, we do a really good job of listening with our mouths, and I think that I encourage all of you in our respective roles moving forward, and of course being this COP and having this opportunity and see what's next to listen more and to really plan with your communities to really understand what they need, to take it to the next level, and so it doesn't just stay in words, but actually in projects, in actions, and implementation, and not just checking a box, but always have this equity lens. So definitely encourage you to do so, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, well, thank you to each and every one of you that took the time to be here. We honor your time. We honor the investment that you made in joining us today. And we ask that you keep equity first and that we acknowledge the power of faith and culture in everything we do. So thank you. We will take questions after we exit this stage. Thank you. Thank you so much.